view. Today, we would like to begin the Biographia Literaria, chapter 14 and chapter 17. And the other day we finished introductions and as well as chapter 4. You know, at the beginning we talked about how this literary theory, because you know Coleridge was basically a romantic poet, but here he appears as a critic, a romantic critic, and his Biographia Literaria means that is his autobiographical, sometimes semi-autobiographical literary poetic theory, and also his philosophy, history, and then the political situations of the French Revolution, its American Declaration of Independence, and also the aesthetic theory and the transcendental philosophy, and the 19th century all the philosophers that he visited, and he has propounded and analyzed their views in terms of Coleridge's point of view. And why this theory is very important, try to understand the background, because you know Romantic revival happens against the new classical period, 18th century poetry, as the against. Why? Because the French Revolution movement, they inspired the two collaborators, Wordsworth and Coleridge, to make the revival with the publication of lyrical ballads. And here, this lyrical ballads, preface to lyrical ballads, Wordsworth wrote his detailed description and characteristics of the new kind of poetry against the new classical poetry, and he published the lyrical ballads as well as the preface to lyrical ballads in 1800, and this 1817 Coleridge published. First he wanted to make it as a preface, but later on he decided to turn this volume into a literary theory. And why the literary theory important? Because there is a longer course as romantic poetry in your syllabus, and before you know all the romantic characteristics, what the aspects dominating in all the romantic poetry, Wordsworth and Coleridge, they have described some of the views and their characteristics. They have described why it is a new kind of poetry, why people should read it, why it is different from the previous age. They analyzed and described these matters. And Coleridge also, he has described the matter. First he began this themes with association of Wordsworth. He is one of the close friends and the collaborators also of lyrical ballads. He appreciates some of the poetry, at the same time he disagrees with some of the point of view made by his close bosom friend Wordsworth, because you know in terms of especially the chapter 14 and 17 that today I am going to discuss, deals with nature of poetry, function of poetry, purpose of poetry, at the same time the definition of a poet, definition of poetry, poem, prose, at the same time any prose composition, and the creative faculty. I mean, before the poetic theory, poetic creation, there is some inspiration that works into the mind of a poet, that is the creative faculty. That creative faculty in the form of imagination and fancy, and how the difference between imagination and fancy work together, he analyzed in the chapter. And in 17 also he propounds that in lyrical ballads, Wordsworth, he glorifies the rustic humble life, that a poet is a man talking to another man. A poet, as he thinks that his poetry is the outburst of the feelings, emotionally collected in tranquility, with the words used by really rustic, humble people, the people those who are in the lap of nature. And this a very, very poetic definition or explanation that Wordsworth glorifies is not equally glorified by his friend Coleridge. And how? This is the matters in short. Now let's move together. In chapter 4, because we have passed some moments during the mechanical problem, let's come back to directly to chapter 14. Chapter 14 especially deals, this is the summary of chapter 14. You know how the chapter 14 important. How the chapter 14 important. Here Wordsworth, he calls the term that the ordinary life, the ordinary treatment of nature, and this ordinary common language or common things that is chosen by Wordsworth. But Coleridge, he takes the another way, that is supernatural treatment, and he describes that is the willing suspension of disbelief. And how does he prefers the supernatural world, and whereas Wordsworth has chosen the natural world, the natural common ordinary a language and ordinary treatment of natures, but by the treatment of the poetic faculty, the ordinary will be turned into extraordinary. And then the power of this poetic faculty, as well as some differences, prose, poetry and history and other branches of knowledge, how it is different, he has proposed it. So in short, if I summarize some, that how Coleridge has pointed out that how he made discussion with his friend Wordsworth poetry, and at the same time how they observe the external world and the power of the poetic imagination, and that imagination is a transforming power of coloring imagination and the treatment of supernatural power. This matter, the views of nature and function of poetry in philosophical style and terms, he describes and he differentiates poetry and prose. And Wordsworth, whatever he has written, okay, that's true. At the initial stage in chapter 4, Coleridge pointed out that Wordsworth was struggling to be a genius in the literary world, but at the beginning he never was, but gradually he has developed that status of being a genius. And so these two cardinal points of poetry here, in terms of that theory, Coleridge has examined here. And let me quote from the text. During first year, because here try to get the poem, two cardinal points of poetry by Coleridge. Coleridge here pointed out two cardinal points. Cardinal means two principal points. How? One is the nature based on, that is treatment of nature by Wordsworth, and supernatural treatment by Coleridge. So this is the two cardinal points. Let me finish, let me read that one. During the first year that Mr. Wordsworth and I were neighbors, our conversations turned frequently on the two cardinal points of poetry, the power of exciting the sympathy of the reader by a faithful adherence to the truth of nature. This is very important, dear students. That is adherence to the truth of nature. I mean, you know, Wordsworth is mainly famous for his as a nature poet, and his fantastic belief, the beauty of nature, and the now how the ordinary beauty of nature becomes extraordinary, and why the people living in nature, they are the super characters and the features of his poetry he described. And the last line, and the power of giving the interest of novelty by the modifying colors of imagination. This is very important. This is the last one, that is the chosen by Coleridge. You see, let me repeat, the power of giving the interest of novelty by the modifying colors of imagination. So Coleridge is, you know, that is, he believes in the power of imagination, that without the faculty imagination, later on I will describe how it is different from fancy. This is the poetic faculty, and without the power of imagination, the poetry is not possible to inspire the readers, to win the heart of the readers, to give pleasure. I mean, it cannot be a good piece of poetry. So this imagination is a prime object of his glorification, and here he differs also with the treatment of Wordsworth, that Coleridge poetry was not based on this poetic faculty of imagination, the modifying colors of imagination, that was not fully exploited by Wordsworth. So try to understand how Wordsworth would write poetry dealing with the theme close, and this is the again in favor of this sudden charm which accidents of light and shade, which moonlight or sunset diffused over a known and familiar landscape appeared to represent the practicability of combining both these are the poetry of nature. I mean, he is describing this, and at the same time he is appreciating lyrical ballads Wordsworth, because what was the function of Wordsworth? Here he describes that Wordsworth's function was to give the charm of novelty to things of everyday by awakening the mind's attention from the lethargy of custom. This is important. Lethargy of custom means from the bondage of the artificial language, artificial picture of the 18th century, I mean the new classical tradition. And Wordsworth has, Coleridge has their romantic, I mean the lyrical ballads, they have broken the tradition of that lethargy of custom, and they have introduced a new kind of poetry. And last line is very important, drifting it to the loveliness and the wonders of the world before us. So nature is always brings you the loveliness and wonders of the world. You think of the Tintin Abbey, you think of Ode to Immortality Ode, you think of the world daffodils that we have come across in the second year. They always the loveliness and the wonders and the blessings of beautiful nature. You see this. So here you get the sum of the points, and again another quotation I don't like to mention here, and I would like to focus their main thing, how and where the difference between poem and poetry. This might come into your question, dear students. The question will be focused on what is the difference between poem and poetry, or a poem from a prose combination according to Coleridge. So this is very important question, and you should follow attentively from our lecture sheet. A poem contains the same elements as a prose combination. It's very dramatic presentation, you see. I mean, apparently there is no difference between a poem and prose composition, Coleridge says. But of course there is some difference. What is that? The poem created out of memory, imaginations differ from a prose only in the use of meter and rhyme. So this is very important. Only the use of the meter and rhyme that can make differentiation a prose. I mean, a prose piece of writing doesn't have meter or rhyme. So this is the basic difference initially he agrees here. And let me quote from Coleridge: a poem contains the same elements as a prose composition. The difference therefore must consist in a different combination of them, in consequence of a different object being proposed. According to difference of the object will be the difference of the combination. Possible that the object may be merely to facilitate the recollection of any given facts or observations by artificial arrangement, and composition will be a poem merely because it is distinguished from prose by meter, by rhyme, or by both conjointly. So this is the quote that you can quote in support of your answer. This is the textual line, because in order to prove or support your discussion, you have to prove the textual lines always. Otherwise, marks will not be awarded fully. And here, then Coleridge makes the difference how a piece of poetry is different from a scientific and a historical composition, and what is the purpose of poetry and the scientific truth. He is giving the analysis. And let me summarize in a way that to Coleridge he is saying the main purpose of poetry or poem is to give pleasure, delight, entertainment, and the secondarily, if possible, that will give the didacticism, I mean truth or moral lesson. Whereas any piece of scientific composition or any historical compositions, their main purpose is just the opposite of this literary piece. They first convey truth, I mean the lesson, the scientific data analysis, the historical facts. It's mean the truth, the true real representation of their experience or observations, and secondarily, if possible, the pleasure they will add. So try to understand how it is different from these ways. And prose works, of course, they are meant to pleasure, but if pleasure and instruction, here is also the difference with the 18th century literatures. The neoclassical, I mean the previous age of the Romantic period, their focus was to give instruction, I mean truth, a moral lesson first, and secondarily pleasure. So it is also the opposite of the neoclassical age. It's the opposite of the neoclassical poets, especially the Swift, Pope, Addison, Steele. Okay, so I think in fourth year, possibly or third year, you will read The Rape of the Lock or Gulliver's Travels, the neoclassical poetry. Their didacticism, I mean the satire. So not their purpose is to give pleasure, but to change the society, to change the behavior. So the true real presentation of the truth is necessary. Here the pleasure is the secondary attempt of the writer. Then the Coleridge is asking the questions that if the question of meter and rhyme that can make the difference between a prose and a poetry, the prose and a piece of poetry, then if someone adds meter and rhyme, then it will be a poem. So it is his direct question. Please follow. Would then the mere superaddition of meter with or without rhyme entitle this to the name of prose? Very, very important. He is asking, if the question of meter and rhyme comes, then if superaddition means if we add to earth the best portion, the meter and rhyme, then it will make a poem, it will make a piece of writing a beautiful poem. And understand answer, no, the direct answer is not, because poetry or a great piece of poetry is a total harmonized portion of a total combination of a whole. I mean, nothing is, one part is affected, the another part will be affected. So that's why he is telling, Coleridge is telling he is giving his answer that if meter superadded, other parts of combination must harmonize with it. Let me repeat, if meter superadded, I mean if you add meter, if any poet adds meter or rhyme, the other parts of the composition must harmonize each other. I mean only the super force of addition of the meter and it will add and make a piece of writing a poem is not so easy. So it's not easy to write poetry. It's not easy to become a good poet. It is the summary of his message. And then come to the other ones, how this is coming. He describes here very beautifully try to understand. Let me quote the right one to answer. Having this object, I mean marked in blue, having this object in common with it, it is discriminated by proposing itself such delight from the whole as is compatible with a distinct gratification from each component part. I mean each component part, each part should be integrated to each other. So a poem is opposed to science works conveying pleasure, not truth. And the poem is an organic whole where various parts work in harmony to provide pleasure. So this is the concluding line is very important. The poem is an organic whole where various parts work in harmony to provide pleasure. And here is a diagram. Dear boys, you can make it a snapshot so that very easily you can understand how does it differ, the summary, what I have told, the same thing is written here. Okay, the difference is made in terms of different combination of those elements. And the third one, the poem created out of memory, imagination, that is differs from a prose. And the poem is opposed to science, words conveying pleasure, not truth. And the poem is an organic whole where various parts work in harmony to provide pleasure. So I think this cyclic order will give you how does a good poem develops and how does it differs with a composition and in what way, in what degree. And this, I think it will help you a lot. So let's move towards here that the Coleridge's treatment of imagination. And imagination, already I talked my last class that imagination is the creative faculty, and without this creative faculty no one can be a great poet. And Coleridge always lived with this faculty, with this blessings of that faculty, without which no one can be a great poet. And he differs how imaginations has works two ways, that is primary and secondary, and that secondary ones is the poetic faculty, which not only gives shape and order to given world but builds new worlds too. And then he differs with how fancy, and fancy is just a mechanical process, it is a mechanical. If it compares with a person's body, so body is the fancy and the soul is imagination, and without soul actually body cannot exist. So the external sensation, external observation, experience, that is to be combined, that is to be presented by the faculty of fancy, and how to analyze, dissolve, and how to process into the organic whole, that will be done by the power of imagination. And this is the way that he gives and glorifies these ways. And then there was here he goes finally the definition of poem, and this is already I have told that a pitch of writing in which the expression of feelings and ideas is given intensity by particular attention to diction. And then he terms the term legitimate poem, very nice and very modern expression given by Coleridge, that legitimate poem. Legitimate, you know, boys, this is called, that is the boidho, but here how? Legal. In Coleridge's language is a small composition in which meter and rhyme bear an organic relation to the total work. In total work faculty, that is how the function of meter and language words together, in which meter and rhyme makes a very organic relationship. And this is again quotations, I don't like to read out, you read and you can make a snapshot because it will be available recorded in this group. You can later on see as many times as it is possible. And then he defines poetry. What is poetry, you see? Poetry of the highest kind may exist. I mean, he is telling this poetry is to some extent higher than a pitch of poetry, I mean poem. I mean poetry is higher than poem. So here is his statement: poetry of the highest kind may exist without meter and even without the contradistinguishing objects of a poem. I mean, he is saying that a poem must have meter and rhyme, but poetry, it is not necessarily bound in duty that a poetry must possess meter. And if so, he is asking, there are many romance, there are many prose pieces, they are not written in poetic terms, rhymes, but they have their poetic faculties, they are the poetic qualities, and they are, though they are written in prose composition, but they possess the highest artistic presentations of their poetic expressions. So poetry may exist without meter. So this is the very important point, dear students, you must follow these lines. And it is the distinction resulting from the poetic genius itself, and it is possible only through a genius. Without the poetic genius, I mean the genius poet, a good poetry, a good piece of poetry, I mean poetry must not be written. So poetry is actually the manifestation of a genius mind or genius poet. You have to, this is the, I mean ordinary person, ordinary poet cannot produce poetry. Okay, dear students, it's very important line. Let me finish. It is a distinction resulting from the poetic genius itself, which sustains and modifies the images, thoughts and emotions of the poet's own mind. Poet's own mind, I mean the exploration of mind. And mind means that this faculty of the imagination, that is the exploration, total demonstration and exploration, activity of total mind, that is the results that results into the creation of a good piece of poetry. So the difference between poet and poem is not given specifically. So actually he has written this so many ways, but no specific difference that can make the two different things is not, he has not given. And this is another line I don't like to say in Coleridge's verse. This is very important, how poetry should be written and how the function of soul of the poet and how the function of the poetic faculty, how the function of the primary and secondary imagination that will work. He has given these things in this line. Try to get the poet described in ideal perfection brings the whole soul of man into activity. That is, quote this phrase, this is very important. If you only quote this phrase, that the brings the whole soul of man into activity, I mean how the function of soul can work together and how the total activity of soul works in creating poetry, this is the result. With the subordination of its faculties in each other according to their relative worth and dignity, he diffuses a tone and a spirit of unity that blends and fuses it into each by synthetic and magical power. Another good term, synthetic and magical power. I mean the great mind, the mind of great genius, they have their magical power. Their soul possesses the magical power to transform a ordinary thing into extraordinary pitch, to transform a natural world into supernatural world. And their students who think of Ancient Mariner, how ordinary things is created with this synthetic and magical power of imagination, with the exploitation of this imaginary power imaginations, with the poetic theory of willing suspension of disbelief, how this great piece of poetry was written by Coleridge. So which I would exclusively appropriate the name of imagination. So this power of imaginations is very important here. And then go back to our chapter 17, that is very important. So here there is another diagram, you will find a cycle, what is the difference between poetry and poem, already I have discussed, and you will just see it from this cyclic order. I have made it in a cyclic way for the better understanding of you, how is different from each other, how in what way they give pleasure and in what way they presents the activity of the whole soul, in what way in the case of especially poem and in the case of especially poetry, and how should we distinguish each other. This is very important, that you can from this cyclic order you can easily understand here. So chapter 17 already we have come, and their students wait some little bits. I think within 15 minutes I think I will be able to finish chapter 17, and I think the question may separately set in your examination from chapter 17 also, and also from 14. And 14 already I have described the main ways how pitch of poetry, how poem, how is it different to each other, how is it different from prose combination, and especially their function, and then instead of poetry, how is it different from history, science, in what way, and why poetry is higher than poem, okay, and what qualities that a great poet should be gifted with. A genius like Coleridge or Wordsworth, he has given in details in chapter 14. And I think if you later on follow this, my lecture, my delivery, and these slides is no matter for you to have good grades and understanding. So poetic, chapter 17 is very important. You can see here is this some disagreement, not glorification of Wordsworth poetry. It's not glorification. It is how and where or from an educated person. So this difference between educated and non-educated, difference between education, non-education, he is talking about here. This matters. So try to understand here. The best part of human language derived from reflection of the acts of the mind itself. It is found by a voluntary appropriation of fixed symbols to internal acts, to possess and results of imagination, the greater part of which have no place in the consciousness of an educated man. Get the point? Dear students, here is the hints that the term greater part of which no place in the consciousness of uneducated man. He is talking about Wordsworth, that Wordsworth poetry and his people, his language was as really spoken by rustic people, real man, and the ordinary language of spoken by ordinary people who are living in the lap of nature. So those people are rustic people, those people are not educated. So here Wordsworth glorifies in his preface to Lyrical Ballads, but here Coleridge differs. And Coleridge's main objections to Wordsworth that it is not possible of an ordinariness, of or ordinary faculty of an uneducated person. It is not possible because the ordinary people, those living in the nature, they don't have the power of sensibility. They learn, they borrow their ideas, the knowledge from the religious institutions, from churches, from Bible, from educated persons, in what way they develop there. And also every person is different from another person's, and every person has their own characteristics. So it is not possible that their language and their emotions finer, and their language it is fit for poetry. And here the main objection of Coleridge towards Wordsworth. Now let us see the again the cyclic order. What does it say? The same thing which I have already talked about, the best part of human language, and also the educated person, I mean education, and also the power of imaginations. So mind, imaginations, and education, I mean the educated faculty, I mean educated person, I mean a poet has to be educated, a poet has to be more sensible than the ordinary person, and it is not possible to inherit, to possess that sensible power, that sensibility, that power of creating poetry, or the power of nobility in living in nature. He is differing here. So Coleridge's objection to Wordsworth here is very much clear, you have to understand. And Coleridge says that Wordsworth has generalized the matter, and the generalization is not valid, okay, and he is giving that way. And last line you see important. What is apparent is that the language of poetry undoubtedly comes from the imagination. Try to understand. If the language of poetry comes from the imagination, so the ordinary person, the rustic people living in nature, they don't have that power of imaginations. So how can their language, how the poets, the language of poetry is the language of the imagination, how the language of poetry is fit for poetry, and it is derived from the nature, the ordinary person, how could it be possible? I mean, here is the questions made by Coleridge. So again, another diagram or another presentation in short I have made for you, so that you can easily understand why Coleridge makes objections to Wordsworth's use of the real language of man. So here in the middle of the figure, that is the objection of the real language of man, the middle one, and follow the right. He talks about the first one, that he attributes acts of imagination to educated man. I mean, educated person has the power of imagination. In that case, those who possess poetic genius, they have. And what is apparent is that the language of poetry undoubtedly comes from the imagination, and the way the poet perceives the world, and to use Wordsworth's term, translate it for everyone else, is an act of the imagination. So this, you think the touchstone of judging the best poetry explore that is the real, the ideal world representation. Okay, that the some ideal representation is possible through mind, through imaginations. Otherwise the ordinary world, because you know, according to world is the shadow of the ideal world. So these real people, those who have this the nature, they don't have that original, the real faculty of sensibility or imaginations. Okay, so their language is not fit for good poetry. And then this is very important, their students follow. Here's the difference that side by side I have tried to show. In Preface to Lyrical Ballads, Wordsworth, already recently I think you have come across Preface to Lyrical Ballads, already delivered by your chairman. You have come to know in details that here what does Coleridge say, that I have done for the reason already alleged to bring my language near the language of common man. Here Wordsworth says, you see, language of common man. I mean, Wordsworth glorifies the language of common man, where is it is rejected by Coleridge, that the language of common man not possible. Language of extraordinary man should be. Language of educated man, that should be, not the common man. But there is some uncommon man in the name of extraordinary, I mean educated section of the society. And the Wordsworth last point, the language too of this man is adopted, because such men hourly communicate with the best objects from which the best part of language is originated, derived. I mean, best objects is nature. So only the nature teacher, moral teacher, friend, as you have understood from the Tintern Abbey. Here Wordsworth found, he discovered a blessed mood he has learned from nature from his second visit there. So nature has the living organ, a living soul that can heal, that can shape, move human world, human mind. Okay, he glorifies, but here Coleridge totally he disagrees with the matter. And how? Here is the Coleridge objection and his reputation, how does he refute his friend? The best parts of language resulted from educated reflection. Dear viewers, this is very important. Try to follow. The best parts of language also told what? The best part is derived from nature, best objects of nature. Okay, here the best part is common from the each, but best part is once derived from nature according to Wordsworth, but it is derived from educated from Coleridge. The best parts of language resulted from educated reflection rather than familiarity with simple and natural things. I mean, rather than the natural world, rather than the ordinary representation of the nature or the simple and natural things. So those who live with these simple and natural things, they are also simple and natural. So is it possible to expect larger than this simple and natural environment? Okay, Coleridge confirms this in Biography Literature, stating, this is, try to follow marked in green alphabets, the best part of human language, properly so called, is derived from reflection on the acts of the mind itself. Acts of the mind, again the poetic faculty, again the poetic mind, poetic activity, again that faculty, the mind that is the charged, activated by the power of imagination. Okay, so this act of, and this is the larger faculty, widening faculty only possessed by educated section of people, not by ordinary people. Get the point? So already I have finished in short here the main objections and why does Coleridge differ, as well as Coleridge gives his part and his own language. So this is, their voice is very important, mark this ways. So here Coleridge, in one way Coleridge praises Wordsworth's poetic diction, figures or metaphors conveying a strong passion. At the same time he rejected the 18th century dictions that upholding the truth and nature in poetry that made by the 18th century. Okay, so here's the distinctions also made, glorifying the strong passion as dealt by the Romantic poets. So Wordsworth, according to Wordsworth, the proper diction of poetry lies in the language of real conversation of man under influence of natural feelings, that already rejected by Coleridge. Okay, so this is very important, and you should, I think you have understood very clearly the two ways and how human soul flourish, natural rustic life, and how Coleridge, Wordsworth says the source of independence, the education sensibility and their heart, and the nature, the mighty world of eye and ear, as spoken by Wordsworth, influence. But Coleridge says, no, without the greater faculty of mind, without the greater faculty of imaginations, it is the useless representation as my friend Wordsworth is talking about. Because he gives a comparison with a blind man. For example, he is saying that you think of a blind man, a beautiful picture, if you show, or if a beautiful melodious music is a blind man who is deaf and dumb, can he appreciate, can he understand? Nothing. So it is just a beautiful picture or a beautiful music is useless to the blind and deaf person. The same way, a person without the faculty of this greater mind or imaginations or the sensibility or educated faculty, it is useless. That language cannot fit for the entertainment, cannot fit for language of poetry. Okay, so he is talking about this matter. So I think I am nearing the conclusion, dear boys and girls, if followed. So the experience, and also there is another matter. Coleridge rejected this rustic representation, glorification. He is saying that the experience of the rustic people is limited, is very limited, because they are not educated. They live around in the very close door to each other. Okay, they learn from Bible, they learn from religious person or priest or any other educated person. So how can they produce better language? They can't think, they cannot express logically, they cannot consecutively, lucidly. So their language is unfit for poetry. Okay, so this is the Wordsworth view, and it is rejected by Coleridge. So rustic life, according to Coleridge, this rustic life is narrow, acquainted with physical needs. Okay, it is narrow, and there is no reflection of the acts of mind itself. Act of mind means that imagination, no flourishment of educations there. So human imagination, reflection is very narrow to this sort of people. So this question, real language of man, low and rustic life, as glorified by Wordsworth, is totally rejected and finds no expression, praise from his dear friend Coleridge. Okay, so here is the distinction between two poets as two critics. So this question may frequently set in your examination. How does Coleridge differ or reject the language, the theory of the glorification of the real language of man, of low and rustic people, as glorified Wordsworth discuss? Okay, so a great question, is very relevant question, is important here. Last Marx's line I would like to quote, very important, then we will finish. An uncultivated mind, however, overpowered by strong passions. Very, very important. I mean, the ordinary people, they have the uncultivated mind, and this cultivated mind only the educated, I mean the imaginative, sensible person they have. The ordinary rustic people, they don't have their cultivated mind. Okay, this is very, because they are overpowered by strong passions, because they are motivated, guided by their reckless imaginations, reckless passions, emotions, not logical presentation, not reasons. Okay, so here there is no balance between reason and passion in this sort of people. In a state of excitement of, as Wordsworth adds, his words, phrases as broken, a literary artist requires great care to Sudan. It is very beautiful, and it is very beautifully he has concluded that if any language, if any expression, poetic words, diction made by or chosen from these rustic people, then it is very difficult to represent to the greater section of the readers, and to make it presentable, a literary artist has to have great patience and care. I mean, a great addition, great modification, transformation is needed there to make it, to turn it fit for poetry. So okay, thank you for your participation, dear students. Thank you very much. Thank you.